Thank you everybody for joining. Let's get started. Hi, Jalive from Malawi. Nice to have you on board. Jessica from Uganda. Thank you. Hakam from Jordan, where it's relatively not overly hot. We are quite nice. Thank you for joining and thank you for introducing yourselves. Let's get started. Welcome to our webinar on 10 tips to improve your proposal budget. This is being delivered by MZN International, which is a social enterprise with currently many services subsidized, and we have just brought back in-person training, which was disrupted due to everything COVID related in the last couple of years. And we work with NGOs around the world to help them to be better funded, to operate more actively and deploy smarter strategies. My name is Hande. I am a consultant with MZN International with a background of around 20 years in international development, in writing and implementing different types of proposals. So I hope what we share today will be key takeaway points for your operations on a daily basis. Some initial information, please note that this webinar is being recorded, and following the session, both recording and the slides will be shared with you through your emails. What are we going to talk about in this webinar is the rights and wrongs of budget preparation, donor requirements and how to meet them, and the value of a good budget. We will have a Q&A session at the end, so please use the Q&A box instead of the chat box to make note of your questions, so that questions do not get lost in the chat when we reach the end of our session. Let's start with challenges with budget development. We all find it, one way or another, somehow challenging when it comes to developing the budget for proposals. So when the content of the proposal is not ready in time to develop a detailed budget, we face a key challenge. And if we do not have clear unit costs or benchmark costs within the organization, then it requires to find out those costs from scratch. And if our team members do not respond on time with the information requested from them or with the information we need to build the budget. And sometimes the donor template is very complicated. It's not a template we are familiar to. So it takes quite a lot of time to familiarize ourselves with the expectations of that specific template. But how do you think we would end up with a budget that fails the proposal? So it is many times proposals get turned down even when the technical part receives high praise. One of the key reasons for failed budgets is when the document does not make sense or match the narrative. So even if you have submitted the best project idea ever, if your budget does not correspond or tell the same story of your technical proposal, your entire proposal will fail. So what are some of the reasons why a project budget can fail us? If the calculations are incorrect, if the budget exceeds the stated amount in the terms of reference or in the call guidelines, if the budget does not include all the details and explanations the donor asked for, if you ended up using the wrong template, if the donor template was not used, if there is not enough transparency how the calculations have been made, how you have reached those calculations. If there is a large contingency cost without explanation, so if you're asking for an amount, a bulky contingency in your project budget without giving a clear justification, if the indirect costs are too high, or if they are above the percentage the donor approves, if the human resource costs are not reflected transparently, and sometimes when the budget is too large or too small in relation to the activities you are proposing. So what can we do about this and preventing that our budgets fail? Preparing budgets is equally as important as writing the technical parts. So we cannot emphasize enough that to start as early as possible. You would not certainly leave an activity description to mid-sentence. You wouldn't leave it in the middle, would you? One of our top tips is to treat your budget development as a project itself. So have a meeting with the proposal team, ask questions about the amounts, and identify whether there have been any discussions with the donor on what is eligible, what is not eligible, what are the thresholds, and identify, evaluate whether there is an understanding of the size of the budget. What is your minimum and maximum limits? Study the financial requirements of the donor and make sure you have the correct templates and the correct information. When there is not a template given by the donor, make sure you set up your own detailed template. Develop a project plan with a timeline for the development of the budget that is in line with the rest of the proposal preparation, and amount for the time that you are going to need for the review and approval of the budget of the financial proposal. Make sure all the relevant stakeholders of the information you require are aware of the timeline and what is required of them. So get your team players in place and keep them active. Making sure that the template you use is right. You cannot imagine how many times proposals get turned down because the applicant organization did not use the right template or failed in complying with the template regulations. So always use the donor template if there is one, and understand how it needs to be completed. Structure your budget based on the donor requirements, and ensure that when someone looks at your project budget, they can see the project title, the time frame, and who it belongs to. As I said, if there's not an existing template, use Excel or Google Sheets to develop a budget which can make automatic calculations. If you are designing a template, make sure it contains all the details the donor wants to see, and make sure you get the currency right. If you are using conversions, make sure to include what the source of your conversion is, the website, the rate, and the date of the conversion that was used. As we said, the financial proposal needs to tell the same story as your technical proposal. So make sure that the content is clearly reflected in the budget. It needs to match 100% with what your proposal is telling. Are you telling the same story as the narrative? There are different ways how donors want the information. They might want a activity-based costing. or they might want a line budget with divisions of different components. They might want to see budgets that are divided into different phases of the project. No matter what kind of template or methodology they are asking for, you need to make sure that everything you put in the proposal, in the narrative, needs to be included in the financial proposal. So talking about activity budgets or line by line budgets, depending on the choice of the donor, you adapt your budgeting to the template. If there's no template, it's up to you which way you feel more comfortable with. There's no right or wrong methodology. If you are more used to working with activity-based budgets or work package budgeting, then it is what translates more easily to you. In activity budgets, we separate the program into a group of smaller activities. This is logical to produce, and it makes sure that each activity is packed together, and maybe a better communication of value for money. But it also can be complicated in preparation if your project has too many activities within the proposal. The advantage of line-by-line budgets is that you place all expenses of same type within the same line. So everything that is related to human resources goes under there instead of being divided into different work packages. In either way, it is very critical to make sure you do not forget to add items to your budgets. Of course, when we are building budgets for our proposals, we need to keep asking ourselves some questions, and the budget needs to provide the answers to these questions, such as who will do the work, so we can identify the staff costs, and how long is it going to take. So we have to consider the duration of the project and the actual work time within that duration. And different people in the team might have different durations of work. So we need to pre-calculate that durations. What kind of supplies and equipment will be required? We often see that, in project budgets, they put in vehicle rental, car rental, but they do not add any maintenance cost or petrol fuel costs, and the organization ends up having to cover that from their own budget. We also need to think about the locations, the venues, and how we are going to ensure people's logistics from one place to another. Where will the activities take place? Do we need to rent venues? Do we need to find additional space to implement our activities? And if we have activities, then we also need to think about whether anyone will travel. Are we thinking about local travel, within country travel, or is there international travel as well? And does this include accommodation or per diems, any kind of reimbursement, and what the rates would that would be? And also, will there be supervision required, or an oversight, or an independent evaluation by a financial expert at the midline or the end line of the project? These all reflect as costs in your project budget. Each of these questions have expenses, and if they are not covered in your project budget, then the donor certainly will not pay for them. A challenge we face when preparing budgets for proposals is the concept of direct or indirect expenses. So we need to categorize the expenses as direct or indirect. The direct expenses are anything that is quintessentially important for the implementation of activities proposed in the proposed in your project. And indirect costs are your other running costs, which are important for the project but are not critically affecting. In your identification of the expenses, make sure to categorize them appropriately, because if they are not done correctly and if you miss on the clarifications, then the tab might be coming to the organization's way. And instead of best guessing expense items, look into what the market rates are and try to be as realistic as possible to prevent financial challenges during implementation. Quite a lot of the time, organizations find themselves that they get overexcited when they are writing the proposals and they exceed the budget limitations. So it's like blowing the whole intervention before you even get started. Or they forget to state which currency was used in the calculation. So is this a euro budget? Is this a dollar budget? Or is this in the local currency of where the project is going to be implemented? And sometimes when you do not understand the policies clearly, it is best to go and ask, clarify this with the donor. If you find out that the guidelines or the policies of the donor with regards to indirect cost recovery or the thresholds, they do not work for you, then you might want to think twice, and because this might not be the right donor for your organization. So think about these mistakes and avoid them. Reread what the donor wants, reread behind the lines, and make sure that your financial proposals respect the guidelines identified in the terms of reference. When we cannot find a specific budget item to place an expense under, we end up with a tendency to place lump sums under contingency budgets or creating a bottom line. If you cannot clearly justify what that contingency line includes, then try not to include it. Nobody likes an unclear or vague budget line and it's not an accurate way of making calculations. If needed, calculate a contingency amount for separate budget lines in the budget, like, for example, a contingency for fuel or a contingency for salaries. But make sure that every item in your budget is justifiable. You can explain the numeracy behind it and where the number is coming from. And it's always difficult to justify bottom line percentages, and also they cause problems during implementation and monitoring as well. Double checking, triple checking prior to submission. I'm sure all of your organizations have an internal mechanism for the quality review and approval of both technical and financial proposals prior to submission. Besides the formal approval process, make sure that the formulas and calculations are checked by various people. Fresh eyes, bring in fresh eyes. Ideally by at least one person who has not worked on that proposal, so they can look from a more objective perspective. Triple check that you meet all the donor requirements, the percentage of over costs, the thresholds, the eligible costs that have been identified, and make sure that you clearly explain the budget items. Check again that everything that has been said in the narrative proposal is literally reflected in the budget. Many times there are last minute changes either to the financial proposal or the narrative proposal, and it is possible to forget to make the change in the other document. Make sure that the final number is added correctly back into the narrative proposal. Make sure that your technical proposal and the financial proposal are giving the same information. And the importance of the value of a good budget. So what are some things we are telling the donor when we provide them with a budget? We have to keep in mind that, such as our narrative proposal, our budget is also an important communication tool we provide to the donor organization. It tells a lot about our organization and how we cost for things, how we do budgets, and shows that we can be and we can provide openness through providing a clear cost strategy. It can show that we are a good value for money organizations, and it can show that we can prepare a well-prepared budget, demonstrating our efficiency in managing finances. And it can show that we can understand the guidelines and comply with them. And most importantly, if we provide a project budget which is fully compliant and answering all the questions, that it shows our skill. If we are providing a wrongly calculated and misleading budget, then, well, they wouldn't give us much chance in implementation, would you think? Just as we come to the end of our webinar today, I would like to remind that we have new online training courses for NGOs that are interested, and you can reach them online. You can learn at your own pace, supported by live interactive webinars. And as I said in the beginning, our in-person training courses are back. So you can take a look at our website for the dates and locations. We are trying to implement them as, in different places, locations as possible, and hopefully more locations in the upcoming years. And feel free to stay in touch with any questions, both on this webinar, and we look forward to seeing you in upcoming webinars as well. As I have said in the beginning, the recording and the slides will be shared with you after the webinar. And I think we have a question. If 2 or 3 donors are together, how can that be arranged? I think the question is also with regards to how to divide the overhead costs. So I'm supposing that you are asking this for a project that receives funding from multiple sources. And if they are happening at the same time, then, the flow would need to be divided in terms of the load of the project and load of the amount available. But if additional donors are brought on, then this would need to be negotiated on a individual basis. I am taking a look at the Q&A box and cannot see any questions. So I'm going to call it a day. Thank you for your participation. And as I said, we look forward to seeing you in our upcoming webinars. Thank you.